In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create wet ground texture, also how to add reflections to it, plus how to create bokeh lights, and also how to add lens blur using the depth maps. All of that in this video, so without any further ado, let's start with the tutorials. The first technique that I want to explain is the wet ground. And we are going to apply to this floor, and let me just hide all of these layers right here. Okay, now so we are going to go to the floor, and by the way, this floor is from Neo stock. Now we have this new floors bundle that you can check on our website. Now that we hid all of the objects, I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to fill it with black by clicking on Shift F5, and I'm gonna choose black, and I'm going to click on the default right here and make sure the black is on front and the white is on the background. And I'm going to slide this all the way up so I can make the texture, and I'm gonna go to filter, render clouds. Okay, now we have the clouds. Now click on Ctrl L, and that will bring the levels. And by the way, if you don't use the shortcuts, you can find it on image, adjustments, and levels. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to make a very high contrast between the white and black. Maybe like that. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to click Ctrl T. This is the free transformation, and then I'm gonna increase the width and the height to 300 and 300, just like that. And then I'm gonna click on Ctrl A to select the whole canvas, and I'm gonna go to image and crop. What I'm gonna do now is I'm going to click Ctrl T again, and I'm gonna line up this line with the ground, where the ground ends. And then I'm gonna click on the right mouse button, and I'm gonna click perspective, and I'm gonna slide this, take this slide up like that so it matches the floor perspective, maybe more. Okay, like that maybe. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna add a new layer beneath the texture layer that we just created, and I'm gonna fill it with black too. And I'm gonna go to channels, and I'm gonna click and hold Control, and then I'm gonna click on the RGB channel. Now let's hit this too, and let's go back to the ground layer, and I'm gonna add a new curves adjustment layer. And in this curves adjustment layer, I'm going to slide this point to the left side, just like that. And I'm gonna click on the gradient tool, and I'm gonna choose the color black. Make sure you are on the transparent one, and I'm going to slide it from the top to the bottom, just like that. And this is how easy it is to make the floor wet. Of course, if you don't like the texture that you created, you can always go up and add a new cloud texture till you get the result that you wanted. And if you want, for example, to like remove it for some areas like beneath the car and all of that. So this is for the first tip, which is adding the wet on the floor, or the puddles, or like that. You can even go further and make a reflection, and the way to do it is you are going to duplicate the curves by clicking and holding Alt, and then take it up. And what you want to do now is click on the mask right here, and then click Ctrl L and make the mask tight, just like that. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna hit it and take it all the way to the top. And then I'm gonna add a new layer, and I'm gonna click and hold Shift Ctrl Alt E, and that will merge all the layers together. And then I'm gonna click and hold Alt and take that mask to the image, and I'm going to take the connection between them. I'm going to remove it by just clicking on there, and then I'm gonna click Ctrl T, that's the free transformation, and then I'm gonna flip it on the vertical side, and I'm gonna take it from here and drag it just right there. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go to filter, blur, motion blur, and I'm gonna add just a bit of motion right there. Add a new curves adjustment layer and make it darker, just like that, and go back to the mask, choose the gradient tool and drag it from the bottom to the upside just a bit, just like that, and maybe decrease the opacity or increase it, and that will make the puddle for you. You can also change the color with the color balance adjustment layer that's set to color blender mode. Maybe you can find a better colors for your puddle. Now for the reflection of the car light, let me just delete this one just like that. And here I have I just showed you how to make the white ground, and I already have this selected or selection, the map, and I created these lights. And if you don't know how to create the lights, it's easy. Go to the car and select the area of the car light or the car torch, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Ctrl J to take it from the car and put it at the top, all the way at the top, and then click Ctrl L and make a high contrast between the light and the dark areas, and delete areas like that's not supposed to be in the light torch, and turn the blending mode to screen or linear dodge, however you want it, just like that, and then duplicate it. And in the duplicated layer, go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and add some blur to it, and then merge them together. And now we have the torchlight set to screen blender mode. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to duplicate it and drag it to the bottom right here, and then I'm gonna go select the wet map that I created, and just to make sure it's not going outside the selection, just like that. And then remove the connection between the layer and the mask by clicking on that lock icon. And then what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to duplicate it, go to filter, blur, and motion blur, and add just a bit of motion, not too much, and then duplicate the same layer and give it more motion blur, just like that, and then merge them all together and add a new layer. By the way, make sure it's on screen blender mode or linear dodge or color dodge, whatever works for you. And you can also go and add levels to it to make it to make the light less bright. And then select the mask, remove the connection between the layer and the mask, and make sure you are clicking on the mask. And what you're gonna do now is go to filter, render, and fibers. What you want to do now is in the preview get an result that looks like a water texture. For me this works right here. The vibrance is 16 and the strength is 4. As you can see, we have created the texture. And what you want to do now is that the layer is not connected with the mask. Click Ctrl T, and that will only affect the mask and not the layer. So I just flipped it 90 degree. And then what you are gonna do now is zoom on the image and make sure you have a water texture on that light. And just like that, we are finished. If you have made it this far into the video, remember to subscribe to the channel. Now what I'm going to show you is how to make the bokeh, and then I'm going to show you how I make my lens blur. So for the bokeh, let me just hit it real quick. For the bokeh, what you want to do is make a new layer and again fill it with black, and then go to filter, pixelate, and go to the meso tint, and then go and choose the coarse dots just like that, and then go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and make a blur around like 1 or 2 pixels, and then click Ctrl L and make a high contrast. And by the way, keep in mind that these points that you see is going to be the bokeh on the background. So you decide right here how many points that you want, or how much points that you want. For me, I'm gonna go for this one, just like that, and then click Ctrl U. That will bring the hue and saturation, and drag the lightness down to -50. Then go to image, adjustments, selective colors, go to neutrals, and you decide here what color of the bokeh you want. For me, I want the warm color, so I'm gonna add red, just a bit of green, and yellow, just like that. And now what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to click and hold Alt and drag this one up just to duplicate it, and then go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and add blur amount of like 4 to 5, and then change that blending mode to screen, just like that. Add them together, and what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to choose an area just like that. That's going to be the bokeh of the city, and I'm going to duplicate just like that and align it with the buildings that's in the background. And then I'm gonna add a new layer and fill it with black. That's going to be beneath the bokeh layer. I'm going to select the canvas image and crop just to get rid of the areas that's outside this bokeh, just like that. And then I'm gonna go to filter, blur, lens blur. And the reason why I chose lens blur, because it gives the bokeh the shape of whatever you want. It's going, if you want, it's going to be triangle or square or anything that you want. For me, I like the hexagon. I hope I pronounced the name right. And then I'm gonna add just a bit of the blade, just like that. And by the way, if it's a lot, you can always go back and click Ctrl L and drag this slide to get less numbers of bokeh. And then you can go back to filter, blur, and lens blur. And here we are going to decide the size and the rotation and all of that. When you are finished right here, second step is to go to filter, blur gallery, and then field blur. And here we are going to add the light bokeh, and we are going to slide this to the right side, just like that. And we are going to decide the amount of the light bokeh by this slides, this one and this two right here. I think this is fine. After that, I'm going to click the Ctrl L again, and we are going to just decrease it just a bit. And now we are finished. I'm going to turn this to screen blending mode, and I'm going to slide this all the way down and put it at top of the buildings. And I'm going to decrease the size just like that and put it where just in random areas. If you are going to make it, if you are not going to blur it at the end, you may want to be specific where to put these lights. But for me, I'm going to add the lens blur at the end, so it doesn't matter. And just like that, we added the bokeh, and it doesn't look like a bokeh because we didn't add the lens blur yet. And now this is the time to go to the lens blur technique. When I showed this sketch picture in the speed art video, most of the people got confused why I did that. This is the way to decide the amount of blur in some specific objects. So the way to do it is first add a new layer and fill it with white. And what you want to do now is go to every object in your work, like for example the buildings at the back, and I'm going to click Ctrl U and I'm going to make it just a bit darker. And then I'm going to go up and select the floor, Ctrl U, I'm going to make it all black, sorry, not here. Make sure you are clicking on the layer that you made. I'm going to make it all black, and then I'm gonna restore some white just a bit, just like that. And then I'm gonna go and select other objects such as the car, Control U, and then make it all dark, and then add some gray to it, just like that. And then the plane, and by the way, what I'm doing now, so when you are going to add the lens blur, the areas that's bright or have white color, it's going to be affected the most by the blur, and the more dark it gets, the less it will be blurred. So this is what I'm trying to do now is, for example, I don't want the car to be affected too much, and the plane too much, and the ground. I want to blur the buildings just a bit, and the sky, I gave it the white color, and that's going to blur it a lot. So now I'm going to select the dog, the other dog, and the model, and the umbrella, and I'm going to click Ctrl U, and I'm going to make them all black because I don't want them to be affected. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the gradient, and then I'm going to click on this reflected gradient and make sure the color is black, and I'm going to drag it just a bit because I don't want the ground that they are standing on to be affected. And what you are going to do now, after you finish giving the values for your objects, click Ctrl A, and that will select the canvas. And while you are clicking on this one, let's name it the lens blur map maybe, and then click Ctrl C, that's to copy, and then go to channels, make a new channel, and make sure you are clicking on it, and click Ctrl V while the selection is on, and we just created this channel. And before we do anything, click Ctrl L and drag this slide to the right because we don't want the sky to be affected too much, maybe just like that. And give it a name, maybe name it lens blur map, and then go back to your image. After you finished with all of the image, you can add a new layer. Shift Ctrl Alt E, that's to merge all the image together. And while the image is selected, go to filter, blur, and lens blur. And while the image is on, go to depth map and select the map that you just created from the color channels, and then add the blur, and you will realize that is affecting the sky and the plane and the car, and it's not affecting the model and the cars. And that will just give you some a more realistic depth of field to your images. And you can, if you don't like the lens blur that you get, you can always go back to this image and make some objects darker or brighter. By the way, notice how the bokeh in the background was too much, so you don't want that. Maybe add a new layer and go to filter, blur, lens blur, and while are you adding the blur, make sure that you are not giving too much blur to the lights of the bokeh, just like that. And the less you get, the more accurate bokeh light you will get right there. This is the end of this video. I hope you learned. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check my latest video on how to create the sun rays lights. Follow us on our social medias, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next videos. Peace.